Good morning, everybody. It's working. Can you hear me? Good. Good. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Pratt. And thank you all for inviting me here today. I bring you regards from the Big Apple, which is right now a wet apple. We had a terrible storm. Um, I'm going to speak to you today about the Holocaust, which you have heard Mr. Pratt tell you. What do we mean by the term Holocaust? It means complete destruction by fire. A time when 11 million innocent people were killed. Who were they? Certainly, Hitler had a special hatred against the Jewish people. He wanted to kill every Jew in Europe. 6 million were killed. But there were 5 million others. Who were they? They were Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies, people with physical and mental difficulties. Anybody who was against Hitler had to be killed, people with different sexual orientation. I have, for instance, a girlfriend who is Catholic, and her grandmother, she had some mental problems after childbirth. They put her in the hospital and killed her. All these people had the right to live, just like all of us here. Among those 6 million Jews were 1.5 million children. And those 3 million children's eyes still haunt me, because I was one of them and they were me too. And I feel a special mission to keep their memory alive. I want to take you now on a journey of my first 10 years growing up in Nazi Europe, and I shall do so with pictures. I was born on December 31, 1934. I know how old I am. Don't take your calculators out. I have a birthday coming up. In a little village called Kippenheim. Kippenheim is about 2,000 people lived there, among them 60 Jewish families. It is a little tiny village very near the French-Swiss border on the foot of the Black Forest. And I was the last Jewish child born in this village of 60 Jewish families. Next. Who's doing the clicking? Are you? Are you going to have to go up and down? Okay. This is the house that I was born in. It still stands today. And if you look on the second floor, the last 2 windows, that is the room I was born in. And supposedly, a midwife was supposed to bring me into this world, but my mother had a very bad pregnancy, and the doctor was called. The only doctor in the village was not Jewish. He already belonged to the Nazi party, in fact, the SS, and he came to my mother's bedside wearing the Nazi uniform, the brown uniform. But he still took very good care of his Jewish patients. And that is very strange, because later on, he was put in jail after the war because he did some terrible things, probably the euthanasia program, killing people in mental hospitals. Next. So in a way, I was brought into this world by a Nazi. My father was a textile merchant. We were comfortable, not millionaires. We already had a car. And I think my mother married my father because he had a car, because that was something very big. Only the doctor in the village had a car, and my daddy had a car. Next. I was an only child. My father was a soldier in World War I. He was wounded very badly and received the Iron Cross. We were very proud German citizens. Yes, we were Jewish. The only thing was different. We went to our church, the synagogue, on Saturday. Christians went on Sunday. And we lived side by side. My great-grandmother, for instance, she had 14 children. In World War I, she had 4 sons in the military. 2 died for Germany. Next. Here I'm probably doing my first experiments in my life. I would grow up to be a chemist. I'm retired now. I worked 38 years in medical research and clinical work. And here I'm probably dreaming already she'll be a Mary Curie someday. Making mud pies, of course. A nice outing to the Black Forest, happy. And I'm wearing the traditional German children's dress, the dirndl dress. I was a typical German child. And I'm wearing the typical hairdo. In fact, it was very funny when I wrote the last book, Children of Terror, my 6th book, with a Polish Catholic girl, because some Poles were also killed in the Nazi era, in the Holocaust. And she had exactly the same hairdo. She was exactly my age, a month older, but she went through terrible things too. So it was very strange when we looked at the pictures. Here, this was the very fashionable hairstyle. They gave me the name Inga, very German name. In fact, later on when I went to school, when the teacher said, Inga, stand up, all the girls would stand up. Next. Here I am in my best dress, my holiday dress, my favorite place. Next. When things started to change was in 1938. And those days were called Crystal Night, the night of broken glass. November 9th and 10th happened in 1938. There was a massive riot in Germany and in Austria, where all the synagogues, our holy places of prayer, were either burned to the ground or desecrated very, very badly. All the men from the age of 16 were sent to concentration camps. In our area, it was Dachau. In other areas was Buchenwald. And here is the last happy get-together. In a way, it was almost the end of my childhood at age close to 4. I was not even 4 years old. My grandparents had come to visit us. They lived about 200 miles away. And you see, my grandfather is wearing his head covered. Orthodox Jews, we were Orthodox. Men, boys and men keep their head covered in respect to God. Now, I know the Pope and cardinals also do that, so they stole that from us, I guess. But that's an old tradition. You keep your head covered. And one thing I want you to notice, the doll. I had a special doll. My grandmother gave it to me. Don't forget, I was a very young child at that time. Not everybody was a teenager. I was very young. It's rare that you will meet somebody who was that young during that time and is still here. And this was the only object that would survive the 3 years in the concentration camp. And I named the doll Marlene after Marlene Dietrich. Anybody know who that famous movie star was? Nobody. But you know Britney Spears, right? Well, she was the Britney Spears of that time. Blonde hair, blue eyes. And I couldn't read, you know, and my mother had these movie albums, movie star albums. I said, that's the lady I'm going to name her after. And that was Marlene Dietrich, blonde hair and blue eyes. Later on, I found out that indeed she was, for this doll, had the name Inga, was the Inga model. Never knew that, that's my name. And she was made for the 1936 Olympics, the Hitler Olympics in 1936. We even made a film about her. We went all the different places to Czechoslovakia and my hometown, etc., to make this film, The Olympic Doll. So she was very famous. She's being made again today. Next. This was our synagogue before its destruction. Next. Inside, beautiful chandeliers. And we have the cantor. All of our prayers are sung, most of them. You can have a rabbi, not a rabbi, because any man can actually lead the service. We had only a cantor, and he's wearing the prayer shawl. It was an Orthodox congregation. Women and men were separated in prayer. Next. And this is what happened after its destruction. Now, there were Christian houses nearby. They tried to burn the building down, but of course the Christian houses would also go up in flame, and they decided, no, we're not going to do that. And they desecrated the building very badly. My grandfather went very early in the morning to synagogue to say his morning prayers. He was arrested from his prayers and sent to the Dachau concentration camp. Police came to our house and arrested my father, also sent him to the Dachau concentration camp. Only women and children were left. And I remember that day so clearly. We were standing in the dining room, and one of the hoodlums saw that our chandelier was still hanging because they broke all the windows in all the houses. We had a very large house, 17-room house. Every window was broken, and the stores were also broken into. And one of the hoodlums saw that the chandelier was still hanging, and he threw a big rock through the broken window. My mother just pushed me away, pulled me, and we were hiding in the backyard shed until the rumpus stopped, till we heard quiet, quite late in the night. All the men were gone from the age of 16 on. Next. For many years, the synagogue looked like this. I took that picture in the 60s. It was used as a storage area for animal feed, especially pig food, totally desecrated. Next. Today, it has been rebuilt and looks like this. The 10 Commandments are up again, but without any Hebrew lettering. It is no longer a house of God. Yes, it is a symbol. Jewish people lived once with us in this village. You have many lectures there. It's a very popular place today, especially with Jewish themes. And there are 2 beautiful buildings in the village. The synagogue sits right smack in the middle of the village, and the city hall. Next. My father and my grandfather came home after a few weeks of this incarceration in Dachau. And when he came home, he spoke how terrible it was. My father never wanted to leave Germany. He said, I'm a German. I fought for this war. I was wounded. I have the Iron Cross. I'm a loyal citizen. The same with my grandfather. But when he was taken to Dachau, they had to give up all their clothing and wear these striped uniforms, stay in the bitter cold for hours. If somebody even wanted to blow their nose, they were hosed down with ice cold water. And that happened to my father a few times. Luckily, they came home again. We decided at that point, sell the house at a cheap price, get out, and still hoping to get out of this country. But all the doors to the free world were closing extremely rapidly. And we moved in with my maternal grandparents in a smaller village called Jedenhausen, also in southwestern Germany. This one is in another state, Württemberg. I was born in the state of Baden, which are today together. And this village at one time was 40% Jewish. But everybody moved away to America, to bigger cities, except my grandparents. And my grandfather was a cattle dealer, small time, as were many Jewish people living in the little villages. I remember walking up this little hill, singing the songs of the day with my Christian friends. And in that village, the people were very good to us, most of the time. Almost everybody was speaking to us. And the children played with me. They knew I was Jewish. There was something quite interesting. If you look at the end of the street on the left side, it's hard to see, there was a little bakery. And that bakery belonged to Albert Einstein's aunt and uncle. Koch was the name. I never knew that. And of course, when I was growing up, he became my hero. I wanted to be like Einstein. I wanted to be a scientist. And had I known that he had some, aspects of this village, that he had come to this village as a little boy, he certainly would have seen me in Princeton, where he taught. I missed that. And I was the only child from that state who was in a camp who came back from the whole state. I'm the only child who returned. We were singing the songs of the day many times, walking up and down the little hill. We didn't even know what we were singing. Next. This was my grandparents' house. And my grandfather had cows in the house. The stable was in the house where you see the black door. That's where the cows were. He had a few left. And I just now spoke in Pennsylvania, and I was on a farm, and I just wanted to see the cows. For me, it brings back only good memories, the smell of it, the whole aroma. I know it smells bad, but for me, it brings back my childhood. Grandmother had chickens and land, and he was a very small-time cattle dealer, and it was a few, 1.5 good years of my childhood. I was 5 years old when we got into Jedenhausen. Next. Here's my best friend Elizabeth, who lived across the street. Her mother was my mother's best friend, Christian people. And again, the doll. We'll do it fast. My grandfather died soon after coming back from Dachau of a broken heart, both physically and spiritually. And we are in front of his grave. And he is the only one in the Jewish cemetery, the last one, to be buried with a plate like that. The other monuments are all standing up. And we did it on purpose, because at that time already they were breaking down, tumbling the stones, desecrating. Thank God nothing happened to my grandfather's grave. Again, I'm wearing the German little dindle dress. Next. Now, these pictures you are about to see are extremely rare. They are of the deportation of German Jews in my village. There are many more things available of Poland, because there were many more Jews in Germany. You had 500,000 Jews, and they lived over 1,000 years in Germany. They just didn't come yesterday. We lived more than 200 years in each of the villages. Now, the deportation to the camps in my hometown, we were no longer living there, started in 1940 in October. And they were taken to a camp in the Pyrenees, foot of the Pyrenees in France, called Gurs, G-U-R-S. You can look it up later if you wish. But the idea was to bring them there then as a transit place. Then it was Rissal, Drancy, Auschwitz. And here they got maybe a half an hour to pack up. You see actual people from my family being deported. These pictures came to light a few years ago when somebody had them up in the attic and decided to give them up before dying. Very interesting is the fact, for instance, this girl, in that village, in my village, people at that time weren't that good to us anymore. They didn't, they were the bystanders and didn't touch anything to help us. I met that woman who's standing there. Now she's quite old. And I asked her, you see how your friends are being taken away? And what did you think? I was just standing there. In fact, this is a distant cousin of mine. The boy there is now, he made it out alive. Very difficult out of Gurs by way of Morocco, in fact. And he's working today in the Library of Congress. He's about 4 years older than I. He did make it. They gave them very little time to pack up, a half an hour, so take what you can. And if we had still lived there, we would have been deported at that time, too. Next. Here are a few more pictures, very rare, that I want to share with you. No, you have to go back. You missed. Okay. No. Okay, here's another relative, then grainy pictures, but they're very important and very rare. Next, please. Here, for instance, you see the townspeople watching. Even the cow is watching as their friends, so-called friends, are being taken away. Neighbors. Next. And the next one shows this man. We know who he was. He was sent to Auschwitz. Almost all these people were sent to Auschwitz to be killed. He has a suitcase with a string, and we told his daughter, that was your father. Said, no, impossible. He was an elegant man. He would go traveling with a string around his suitcase, but it was him, and he did not make it. Next. In 1941, I am 6 years old, and school had to start, but Jewish children were no longer allowed to go to school with the Christian children. There was only one school for the whole state in Stuttgart, and I had to have travel permission to go there. In the beginning, my father took me. We were not allowed to use the bus to go to the train station. We lived about 2 miles away from the train station, and then go for another hour by train to Stuttgart. Later on, my parents had to do slave labor in a factory, and I went all by myself, a 6-year-old, on the train and walking miles to get to the train by myself. I can't even envision it today, but I did it. And it became even more difficult when we had to wear the yellow star. And I have the original star with me today that I wore with the word Jude, Jew, on it. We had to buy those stars, buy them. They came on a sheet, a yellow sheet. You cut them out. They're very poor cloth. My mother backed it up with some cloth on the back. You can still see the stitches on it. And everybody from the age of 6 on had to wear this star. And my father would tell me, try to sit in such a way that you can cover this star, because there were always rowdy boys in the car that I was riding. So try to get to the left side. It wasn't always possible. I remember only one good thing that happened. One day, a woman saw this little girl, 6 years old. Imagine, maybe some of you have 6-year-old brothers or sisters. I'm going all by myself to school, and she put a little bag of rolls next to my seat, walked away. And I remember that woman, after all these years, who remained anonymous, for wanting to do something for this Jewish child. And I never forget her in any lecture that I give, whether it's across the country or in Germany or anywhere else. So you never know if you do even a small deed. For her, it was a small deed, that people will remember you for that. So somebody brings you homework when you're sick or something, it will remain with you. A kind deed is very important. And this was the school I went to. There were 2 classrooms, 1 to 4 class, and then 4 to 8. School stopped after 6 months. I never finished my 1st grade. At 6 months of schooling, I would lose 8 years of schooling in my life. And because the transports began. Next. Doesn't work well. Here's one of the classrooms. Next. Star that wore. Next. And what I looked like at that time. Next, go further. And after, in 1941, the end of 1941, the transports, meaning sending the people to the concentration camps, began in that part of Germany. We got an order for transport. My grandmother too. My grandfather had died already. And my father, who had been an alumnus of Dachau, he said, we have to try to get out of this transport. I don't like what's going on. Who knows where they're going to send us with all the lies they're telling us. And he wrote a letter that he's a disabled war veteran with the Iron Cross, had pictures taken of his wounds. He would never be able to raise his right arm. Shrapnel hit his right shoulder. Somehow we got out of that transport. A miracle. And we tried the same for my grandmother, couldn't. School stopped. Almost everybody was sent away. And they took the house away and sent us to live in Jewish houses in a slum area. Here are still some of the children alive at that time. As a small example, the one in the striped hat is the only one who survived from that little group. That's me standing before you. Next. The order for transport came again in August of 42. I have my original transport paper still. I have a copy of it here. You can see it later. And you got a number, and it says you cannot get out of that transport, and the SS orders you for transport. This was a death sentence. And this is how a transport was put together. Next, my number was 408. These pictures were done for my first book because there are no pictures. For I Am a Star, which is now in 8 languages, considered a classic today. It's out more than 20 years, so I've been rather fortunate. And we were ordered to, in little villages, 100 people here, 100 there, to make up the whole transport of about 1,200 people, which would go from the capital, Württemberg, Stuttgart. And I was the youngest in 1,200 people. I was 7 years old. And we were told to assemble in school gymnasium, open everything, and one of the guards saw I have a little Dutch boy pin. I'm 7 years old. And he ripped it from me. He yelled at me in the German, Swabian dialect, "Du brauchst es nicht, wo du hingehst. You won't need this where you're going to." Then he saw my doll in my arm. I was not going to give that doll away. And he ripped her from me. And he looked inside her hollow body to see if I was hiding anything. I wasn't, of course. And I made a fuss. And somehow he gave me back my doll. That's why I still had her to this day, almost, when I gave her to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. Next. We were herded to the main gathering place, and these are when people are saying, this didn't happen, the Holocaust deniers. There were even films made about the deportations. I mean, there's a tremendous archive in Bad Arolsen, the German town. Everything was documented. So when they say the furnaces in Auschwitz where they break bread, I mean, that is totally insane. And we were sent this is actually from a little film that they made for my grandmother's transport. Excuse me? Okay. And we were later on in the same room, a big hall, where they put over 1,000 people, and waiting for the transport to arrive. Next, please. He is standing in line for the transport, exactly what happened to my grandmother. And by the way, these people of that first transfer were sent to Latvia, which is near Russia. And they pretty soon after their arrival, they sent them to the forest and shot them. I went to that place a few years ago. I have not been the same ever since, believe me, because for all intents and purposes, I should be in one of those mass graves. There were at least 52 mass graves. Between 50 and 80,000 people were slaughtered in that forest. Very hard to fathom all that. Numbers, what does it mean, a number? You play video games, you kill 10,000 Marios, whatever. I mean, these were people, lives, children, just like you. Next, and then we were waiting for the train to come. Everybody in Germany had an ID. And we really don't need that here. Yes, you have a driver's license, but it's not required to have an ID like we had to. And ours had a J on it. And my name was on it. And they stamped when I was deported. Umgesiedelt means resettled. 22nd of August, 1942. I'm going to a nice place. I'm being resettled. Not that I'm going to be killed. Next. We were on a train. It was a passenger train, not a boxcar train at that time. I guess they wanted to fool the other people, whatever. Very, very crowded. Took more than 2 days to get there. Very little food. We couldn't leave the car. Also very little water. And we arrived in a place in Czechoslovakia. Today it's called the Czech Republic, called Bauschowitz, little town before Terezin. And we were told to drop everything and march. In other words, just a little knapsack, a bedroll, and your metal dishes. And I had my doll in my arm, and we're marching into the camp, which was about 2 miles away. Next. Marching into the camp, and they were whipping us. We had many old people on the contingent, on the transport. They were falling already on the wayside. They couldn't walk, and my parents put me between them to protect me from the blows. Again, remember, I'm 7 years old. Next. We're marching into the camp. I took this picture from an archive. People were actually watching us, going by. Nobody did anything, and they never saw the people again. Next. Marching into the camp, please. And we arrive in a place called Terezin, or in German, Theresienstadt, which was actually an army garrison town, evacuated, built in the late 18th century by Emperor Joseph II in memory of his mother, Maria Theresia. It was a transit place where you put people like in animals in a stockade and keep them a while, then send them out. We did not have gas chambers at that time there. They were being built. They were ordered by Eichmann, who was in charge of the Jewish question. I know Magda was talking about, I believe you were talking about Eichmann before. I saw him there. He came many, many times. Whenever he came, more transports left. And these were pictures drawn by actual artists. We had many famous people in the camp. It was a place where you had the intelligentsia from Europe, the best musicians, the lawyers, doctors, etc. They put them there, perhaps maybe to exchange them one day, that the Nazis would try to barter their way out, whatever. Most of them were killed, and also very highly decorated war veterans. And so these people who drew these pictures on pieces of stolen paper, where they worked sometimes with the Nazis, and in their, they put some papers away, hid them, and if they were caught, they were sent immediately to Auschwitz and killed. But many, thank God, many of these pictures were spared. We're coming to this big fortress town surrounded by high walls, barbed wire, and wooden fences. Next. And next. And here's what the buildings looked like, even higher. We were sent to the attic of a very big fortress. We pumped our water from polluted wells. Yeah.
Some of our students have to go to C4 Technical School. If they wouldn't mind rising and going right now, so that way we get you all out at the same time. Thank you.
Shall I wait until they're gone or continue? I continue. I don't want to waste time. Too bad. They're missing out. Anyway, we pumped our water from polluted wells. So many people got dysentery, typhus, and all these other terrible diseases. We were 140,000 people in Terezin from 1941. The Czechs came in 41, 45. 2/3 would be sent to the killing centers like Auschwitz. Close to 1/3 died there of malnutrition and disease. We were 15,000 children there. Perhaps a little over 1% survived. I'm one of them. Feel very lucky to be here standing in front of you today. Next. The walls that surrounded us with deep moats, and children always ask me, why don't you just jump down? Where are you going to go? You needed help on the outside. We had no money, poor clothing. We had nothing. Next. And the soldiers were marching on them. Soon after my arrival, there was a epidemic of scarlet fever. They didn't have a real hospital, so they set up a room for the sick children, 2 in every bed. My partner was a baby from Luxembourg, and that bed was always wet. I could not see my parents from about September till just about December. I was covered with lice. I had boils on my body. I was very sick, not expected to live, but I made it. And then I was sent to live with my parents in what was called the disabled war veteran section, run-down houses. Most men, women, and children lived separate. They could still see each other. But the disabled war veterans had a special area where we could live together in very primitive conditions. I remember rats, mice, fleas, and bedbugs. Those were our companions. And we had a tiny, tiny room, 2 out of the 3 years, just bunk beds, no heat. There was, I was thinking now in New York, they're complaining about not having heat. We didn't have heat in 3 years. There was a little stove in the next room. That's how we had the heat. And we shared that tiny room. Your bed became your home, double-deck bunk bed, with a family from Berlin. They had a daughter exactly my age. She was 2 months older. Her father walked with a limp. And in 1944, she was sent to Auschwitz. And just before her 10th birthday, she was killed. Whole family. In fact, her father was half Jewish, and her mother totally, and Ruth was brought up as a devout Christian. She would say the Our Father at night. And I found that strange because we don't fold hands when we pray. She prayed till the very end. She did not make it. Next, double-deck bunk beds, of course, like all the camps had. This picture was taken by the Russian army. We were liberated by the Russians. Next, nobody had a camera. Again, the pumps. Again, the picture taken after liberation. Next, the carts which supplied food and took away the bodies. We had a crematory there too. And they served a double purpose. Next. 3 times, again, this picture was taken after liberation because there was a tremendous typhus epidemic. We could not go home right away. And 3 times a day to stand in line to get your food. Morning, it was like a little black liquid, which tasted like a disinfectant used to clean your clothes. We had a food ration once a week. Not much. My mother would mark off an area, Monday to Tuesday there, Tuesday, Wednesday there. If you went to the next day's portion, you didn't have any bread. Lunch was maybe a potato, a little bit of soup with some junk floating around, terrible tasting. You stood in line with your kettles, your metal dishes. At night, the same thing. It was not enough to live and not enough to die. So we were hungry all the time. Next. And got sick. Next. So I'm always asked, what did your children do? Well, we children were good for nothing. We couldn't work. I mean, what could I do? So we spent our days in the garbage dump looking for a piece of string, a piece that you could still cut off from a turnip. That was the only vegetable I had in 3 years. No milk, nothing. And perhaps potato peelings, you could still cut a little piece off. Constantly looking for food. I know it's almost lunch, you're hungry. So it's good that you hear this now. You feel a little bit what we felt. Next. My mother worked in the so-called old age room for women. They were older ladies. She worked as a nurse. She never was a nurse before. And I remember I came there one day and the ladies had sticks in their hands. I said, why? And it turned out that the night before, one of them felt something heavy on the shoulder. She turned around. What was it? A rat. Rats, fleas, mice, bedbugs, those were our companions. Next. The worst day I can remember happened November 11th, 1943. They said a count out had to be taken. They knew exactly how many people were there at any one time. So at least 50,000 people were taken to this ravine, standing all day. It was cold, it was raining, there were no bathrooms, no food all day. Our feet sunk into the mud, and they were beating us. And very late at night, they said, everybody back. Men, women, and children, separate. We didn't want to. We're holding on to each other for dear life. And one of the worst assessment, his name was Heindel. He took his rifle butt and beat my mother very badly on that day because she was holding on to my mother, to me, and my father. And many people died on that field. Most likely, they wanted to kill us that day because it was like a ravine, and the soldiers were there with their guns pointing at us, either to take us all to Auschwitz that day or shoot us. That most likely was the plan. But somehow news leaked out, and they let us all go back late at night. I will never forget that day. Next. School was absolutely forbidden, but some heroic teachers taught us from memory. Now, some of the Czech children lived in a certain building. They had a little bit better situation. They had some good teachers. I mean, they did it also from memory. They drew pictures, and one boy even wrote a poem, I never saw another butterfly. You see me wearing butterflies all over the place. Pavel Friedman, and that symbol became the symbol of the murdered children. And that's why I wear always a butterfly in their honor. And my father found a little notebook with a few good pages and had a pencil, and one lady knew an English poem. I wish I were a little bird up in the bright blue sky that sings and flies just where he will, and no one asks him why. We wanted to fly away. And I think this penmanship I have here is better than what I do today. Remember, I only had 6 months of schooling. That's it, when I wrote this. Next. In 1944, there was an International Red Cross inspection. And they made it look like a theatrical production. They announced, the International Red Cross from Geneva announced they're coming, but they gave them some time to prepare. They painted signs, the schools, the playground. None of these existed. And they, in fact, even to make it look that not so many people lived there, they sent a few thousand people to Auschwitz at that time to get rid of them. And they put on a soccer game, and they printed money. And some children got, which you couldn't buy anything with it, some mustard, whatever, worthless, ghetto money. And some children were given some sardine sandwiches. And just as they walked away, they would eat them up so quickly, they were hungry. And they made a movie, and you can see that movie on YouTube. The Führer gives the Jews a city. And it's all absolute nonsense. Everybody's smiling and looking happy. As soon as they were away, almost the whole camp was sent to Auschwitz. There were almost no people left. Next. They did not show them, next, the crematory, where the people were burned. I mean, they were not gassed here, but they were burned. We had so many people who died. They went away saying, oh yes, they're incarcerated, but they still can live, and the children have school, they play ball, and all this. It was all junk. It was nonsense. It was a deception. Next. Finally, on May 8th, 1945, I was liberated after 3 years there, close to 3 years. But they burned many of the records, and I remember black pieces of paper floating through the air and partially burned pieces, and the trucks were running, going away, and I jumped one of the barricades to see what's going on. By this time, I'm 10 years old. And just as I did that, I heard a tremendous explosion. They were throwing hand grenades into the camp, killed people still. I ran to my parents, and we found a hole in the ground, and we went down there to save ourselves. The only thing I took with me that day was a prayer book. My father found this little prayer book that a soldier had. His name was in it, that probably he used in World War I, and he was sent to Auschwitz. Maybe he lost his belief in God, or he just couldn't take it. But I never prayed so hard in my life. There's a Hebrew prayer. I don't know if you ever heard anything in Hebrew. Our highest prayer, besides Our Father, is called the Shema. It means God is one, one is God. I'm going to sing it to you, the first few lines. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Our highest prayer. And I never prayed so hard in my life as on that day, waiting to see what happened. We had a little candle, a little stump of a candle. Somehow, about 10 minutes to 9, somebody went up and said, the Russians are here. We couldn't believe it, that this nightmare is finally over. But we had many transports coming in from Auschwitz, from different camps, and they were extremely ill, and we never knew until then that we are being sent out to be killed. They kept it from us, although very few survived. Next. And then finally, a bus came to pick us up from Stuttgart. Some of the people from the death marches sent to our camp. And out of a transport of 1,200 people, around 13 survived. I'm the youngest. I made it. And my parents, which is an absolute miracle because you couldn't do anything to save yourself. 13 people would come back. In our family, we lost at least 13 immediate members, 20 altogether. Next. I want to some years ago, I'll make it quick now, I decided to go back. I wanted to see with adult eyes, this really happened? Or was I dreaming? So I went through, the Russians were still there at that time, and I went through the gate, next, and where I went in 1942, next, and I found the house where I lived. It was still very badly damaged. I've been back many times since then with film crews, etc. The building has been rebuilt. It's a town again. Next. And this was the train street from here. There were tracks built directly to, that went to Auschwitz from here. Next. And I met the mayor at that time in front of the crematory. So the small fortress, but there was a big fortress where we were, and a prison for the prison, a smaller fortress. And that is today a very large memorial. Next. Crematory ovens. Next. And flowers depicting blood. It's much, much bigger today. Many thousands of people go there. Next. And I went for the first time to Europe at that time. I went to the farmers in my mother's hometown to thank them for their goodness during our greatest needs. They would come in the middle of the night before we were deported, brought us a little bread, maybe a little bit of butter, and I thanked them for that. And here's one more picture. It's very important to me. It's a picture of our beloved Teresa, Christian woman. She was Catholic. She was my grandmother's maid for over 20 years, her good friend too. I'm still friends with her great-grandchildren. She would come in the middle of the night to save 2 photo albums. That's why I have pictures, otherwise we had nothing. And our prayer book, she saved those, and a few little knickknacks, Hanukkah menorah, just a few things in her bed. She could have gotten killed for that. And when we came back, we said, we want to see Teresa. And they said, she's dead. She died. Impossible. She was young. And it turned out when the Americans came in to that part of Germany, they knocked on the door. They thought everybody had a gun and would shoot out. And she was standing behind the door. He shot through the door, killing her instantly. I say, if there's a heaven, there are 2 wonderful women, hand in hand, a Jewish woman and a Christian woman, forever united, one killed by a Nazi bullet, the other the product of war. I would like to add just a small addendum. What happened to us after the war? I still have a few minutes. Okay, how many? I just have
about 4 minutes.
It's more than enough. When we came back, we went to my grandmother's house. People were living in it. They prepared one room for us. This was our house. They never paid for it. And my father started a business again, and we decided we're not going to stay in Germany. So 9 months after our return, we decided to come to America with the second displaced persons boat. I had started school again. I didn't know what grade I belonged in, the 4th grade, 5th grade. I didn't know where I belonged. I never even finished my 1st grade. We came to America. My mother had a brother here who was fighting in World War II with the American Army. In fact, he was in Anzio and Casino, very big battles. And my parents had to get a job. So they got a job as a couple. My mother became a cook, maid, etc. Didn't matter. But soon afterwards, I became sick. In the camp, there was one girl, friend of ours, who got a little bit more bread. And she had a certain disease. And I prayed to God. I said, whatever Gerda has, I want. I want to have an extra piece of bread. What was it? It was tuberculosis. And when I came here, the whole thing started all over again. Was very sick. So, you know, it's not about only hearing what happened during the war. It's how do you become a human being again? What are the after effects? They immediately put me 2 years on complete bed rest. There was no cure at that time. Into a hospital, children's hospital. One ward was for polio, the other one for TB. We're all in bed. I was the sickest one on the whole ward. 2 lungs affected. I came home, I was not well, still no school. No, I didn't start school till I was 15 years old and to go to high school. That's the first real time I went to school. So when you think about it, school is a privilege. I know you don't want to go to school, you don't want to take tests. I hated tests too, I did. But it's a privilege, and I was dying to go to school. I was already older than most, and I finished it actually in 3 years. Instead of 4, we're going to summer school. Then I got sick again. I started college, sick again. And by that time, there was a magnificent antibiotic that was discovered, streptomycin, the first drug against TB. Long story, I met the man who discovered it. He was cheated of the Nobel Prize, wrote a book about him, we did a film about that. And altogether, as I told you, 8 years, it was a tremendous, tremendous struggle to get myself whole again. Tremendous. I didn't get married. One of the reasons was also there was a very big stigma. It's like when you say AIDS, TB at that time, even today, oh, they wouldn't marry. You know, TB is terrible. You know, she can't have children. Could have probably had 20, but that's beside the point. But anyhow, there was a stigma, and I didn't get married, not because I didn't have any boyfriend, whatever. That's it. God wanted it this way, so here I am. I say the children of the world are my children. And I worked for 38 years, 30 years in the same job, in research and clinical work. And I hope there are some people in this audience today who will become a scientist. Anybody majoring in science? Come on, I beg you. We need scientists in this country. We're behind the 8 ball, believe me. Take a hard course. Yes, chemistry is hard. Physics is hard. I never look for easy things. Never. Don't look for easy things. They're not good. And now I've written 6 books, published in 9 languages, working on my next one. I do practice what I talk about. I live in a row house in Queens, New York. Queens is the most diverse place in the whole country. My wall touches my neighbor, who is Muslim, very devout, from Bangladesh, Mohammed, wonderful neighbor. The next house is a Hindu family, very religious, from British Guyana, and then comes a Christian house in 4 houses, wall to wall, the 4 religions of the world, and we get along. And that will be my next book, The Hindu Family. They did very well in this country, 3 doctors out of 6 children, very well. So I tell you, I think you should strive, look for the hard things. Don't look for easy things. And be proud what you are. We're all proud Americans. And I would say, God bless America for giving me my health back and a life and to be happy. And we live in God's country here. Believe me, you go anywhere else And you will see, you will be so happy when I come home, when the person at the admittance, at JFK tells me, welcome home. I said, you're not kidding. I feel like blessing the ground. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you. Thank you.